Okay. I don't know where this is going. We'll see what comes in. As usual, I'm here with Carmen, my lizard. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. Oh, where's my tissue? My nose started running already. Hi. All right. Damn it. I can tell the energy starts to run. Let's see, am I going to turn that off? So I'm not sure, as always, I have a bunch of things lined up, but almost as soon as I turn on the camera, it just kind of goes out the window. And I know I've said that before. The energy is already shifting. I don't know if you can tell. I can feel things shifting already. It's funny. I never know if it's because of the individual people who join. I can tell there's an energetic transmission going through. And this operates off of the timeline. So whenever you get this message, it's the right time for you to see it, or it's the right time for you to receive the energetic transmission, the light codes that are going out. I'm already a lot hotter than I was about 30 seconds ago. So we will see what comes in. I've got, as I've said before, I know I say it every time, I've got all of these notepads. And stuff has been coming in the entire day. Things to say, and if I'm near a notepad, I'll run over and jot it down. I think we're going to start with this one. I know this all wants to be a book too. If it was in some sort of more organized format, it would be a lot easier to deliver. But since I myself am not in an organized format, is it hot where you are too? You might be picking up on the energy. I might do the lighting here is bothering me. I futzed with it a little bit. I brought in another light and now it's brighter, but I'm uncomfortable in it. The quality of the light does make a big difference. I was, the other day I was out I was in a waiting room at social services actually, and I was there waiting for someone. And while I was there being very uncomfortable, I was very uncomfortable. I wasn't touching any of the services, and I don't want to pick up any additional energy by touching. It's not germ related. It's sometimes I pick up psychic impressions if I touch things. So I was in the waiting room, but I was not touching anything, and I was just very uncomfortable. And I was shuffling tarot cards while I waited for this person, and somebody saw me and she said, "Do they bring you luck?" And I said, "Well, it's really not a matter of them bringing me luck. It gives me a tangible, helps me connect to spirit in a particular way that's a little more structured, and in environments like this, I need an additional support." And I showed her my crystals. I said I always bring crystals too, because they're very structured and it's locked in vibrational thing. And she said, this was fascinating to me, because sometimes you don't know that you're in the presence of a kind of kindred spirit. She too was extremely uncomfortable in that environment. And I had noticed her, Not the way I notice another psychic. It was a different way. Like sometimes I will notice another psychic. I can definitely pick up who's, psychically who's awake. But this was a different thing. She was also fidgety and seemed extremely uncomfortable and awkward. The word is awkward. That's really what I'm looking for. And she didn't really know about tarot cards, but she recognized something about me. Or maybe we were meant to connect in that space somehow. At any rate, she said, I thought this was so funny because I just talked about this on a previous live stream not too long ago. She said, I know how uncomfortable, she said, I get so uncomfortable in places like this. It's like the light or the general energy of the whole space. I'm really uncomfortable. And she said, I went to Walmart. I can't go to Walmart anymore, is what she said. And I was like, I know. Tell me about it, because I was just talking about that on one of my live streams not too long ago about going to Walmart and how there's almost no psychic or very sensitive person I know who can go to Walmart without it's like almost this really it's like the place you talk about if you're talking about places you go that are like vibrationally ill. It's really kind of disgusting. Anyway, I didn't think I was going to talk about this lady at all. But I wound up, in the short time I met her, I wound up giving her my contact information and telling her she should go connect with me on Facebook and YouTube. And I said I just did a whole live stream on where I was talking about vibrational influences of spaces and picking up things. And there are different ways different methods you can use to kind of shield yourself vibrationally to make it tolerable or bearable, survivable. Survivable. That's what I wanted to say. All right, I'm going to put this lizard down. Do you want to stay on me for a little while? Okay. So where should I start? It's a good thing you're all sticky because you stick to me like a cactus. So some of these things I've talked about already. Yeah, I'll start here. So my father died about 2 years ago, and all the stuff I'm talking about, sometimes it seems like I'm just venting or like telling you my personal crap, but that's really not it. If it didn't relate to the group at large, or have some bearing, if it doesn't relate to you, it doesn't relate to you. But usually I'm using aspects of my personal experience because it relates to something that you'll be able to glean something from and use it in your own life. Hang on. There's an energetic transmission going out, and that's why my nose is running. I may also change the light. Hang on one second. I'm going to turn this off. And then if it's really uncomfortable, I might turn it back on again. Is that better or worse? It's all right. Okay. Hang on. I don't know how to hang on. Little things, it bugs me. I kind of wish I had a candle because now it seems cold. I don't know, just something's not quite sitting right. Okay. So when people die, there's a period of adjustment that varies from person to person, usually depending on what that person believed, their belief systems, how attached they are, how, God, my head's, I know an energetic transmission is going out. Somebody's getting an energetic transmission, probably more than a few people, because my head's bothering me. That always happens. I always want to take my head off. It'd be easier. So my father died about 2 years ago, and being a psychic and having the skill set that I've got, I was, my father was not spiritual at all. He did have certain higher dimensional potentials, but he was very judgmental and didn't want to humor any of them. For example, he had ADD, which is a propensity to pick up information from higher dimensions. ADD can be thought of as attention dialed to a higher dimension. But he thought it was a disorder. He had been told by others that it was a disorder. And even though he was an artist and had the capacity to channel, should he allow it, he was very judgmental very strongly against religion. He thought it was, which I understand, but spirituality, he thought he already knew. He lived in Hollywood. He was very ego-driven, very status-oriented. He thought the more you had, the better it was, bar none. And he thought he was right. And he thought there was nothing after death. And he was correct, and everyone else was intellectually tacky, is really what he thought. And no other opinion was humored at all. He looked down on you if you had any kind of a spiritual belief system. So he really wasn't expecting anything to be there. And he was also extremely critical of anyone who, it's funny because he thought of people as being kind of in a lower caste. Like if you knew that you would have outgrown the idea of religion. So religion, granted, it's a control system, but he also had very little tolerance, interest, no tolerance for anything spiritual in nature. And one time when I was in college and I was in psychotherapy for a long time, and I was an art major, and I was studying astrology, and I had a huge array of interests. And one time, actually I was very close to my father at the time, and there was a point that I had a conversation with him, and I'll never forget this. I had made a point about, I don't know, some person or another. I had connected a whole bunch of things, and I mentioned something about psychotherapy, and it was related to someone acting a certain way because they were a Leo or a Pisces. Naturally that person would have a propensity for this and this and this. And I had connected a whole bunch of things in a sentence, and he was semi-outraged, but also disgusted. The word is disgusted. He was disgusted and very concerned about me. And he said, I'm very concerned. He said, I'm very worried about you because it's like these things are all connected in your head somehow. He thought it was a mental disturbance that I saw connections between all of these things, psychotherapy and astrology and art. And in his mind, those were all separate things, and you should do one thing at a time and be very organized. And he was disgusted and disdainful, hugely irritated, like I'm wiped off the map of what could be taken seriously because I thought that all of these things were connected. So he died about 2 years ago. And because I'm practicing psychic and energy healer, and I go into these realms all the time. I want to, before I continue with that, I want to say one other thing. I spoke to, sometimes we incarnate and our souls have a particular mission which is sometimes we will go into particularly a lineage of such darkness and such density and such non-knowing, such separation. We'll go into a particular arena where it's so dark and we know nothing. Like my father did that, except in his lifetime, he didn't actually wake up. So I'm going to tell you the rest of that story in a second. My twin flame. Well, I haven't seen a lot in a number of years, but it doesn't matter because the mission's the same. He incarnated. It's the one time I spoke to him, and he had said he was very, very unawakened. It's one of those things at the time that I spoke to him, he was very unawakened and didn't think that there was anything else but physical experience, which is as far removed. So twins do this a lot. They will incarnate into, have opposing experiences. They will incarnate into areas of the spectrum that are as polarized as it's possible to be, so that they get the extremes of the experience, and by the time they find their way back to center, to union, they bring as much with them as possible. And then when you share it, you get the there's like very little overlap, but then you share everything, so you have the greatest expanse of knowledge between the two of you, if that makes any sense. And so I don't remember if I had this conversation or if I wrote it, but at some point I had said to either him or I'd written it. I actually don't remember. But when people, whoever it is, when they think that there's nothing outside the physical experience, my impulse, what I want to do is say, well, first of all, I want to laugh, because that's like somebody who's sitting at the kitchen table. His net has never gotten up from the kitchen table. They've lived their entire life sitting at the kitchen table. And because of that, they're absolutely convinced that there's no other existence apart from the kitchen table. They live there and they always sit here. It's my seat. It's the when you go into third dimensional density, you have the experience of separation and singledom. It's individuality and separation. So you're not able, just like my father, at the time, you're not able from that position to see the connection that you already do have between that and that and that, and it's all connected, but you're not going to know that until you leave the idea, you depart from the idea of being separate, being an individual. So you need the idea of being an individual, and there's a portion of individuation that you absolutely do need. But if you get stuck there, you're stuck there. So it's kind of like, so my father got stuck there his whole life. He never found his way out in this lifetime. What I had either talked to Josh or I wrote it to him at some point. If you take the idea of sitting at the kitchen table, what you want to do is say to somebody, that's absurd. There's a whole, you kind of want to say this to the planet too, like the third dimensional planet that believes that there's no other life in the universe. You kind of want to reach in and say, look, there's a whole other, the rest of the universe, there's a galaxy. You're not separate. You're not alone at all. Not only is there other life out there, they're already here too. Your other table mates are also aliens. But it's like I wanted to say, and this is true, I only spend relatively a fraction of my time at the kitchen table. Most of the day, I'm not sitting at the kitchen table. I spend a lot more time in the bedroom than I do the kitchen table. And I can show you right now, you can get up from the kitchen table and I can walk you back in there. Then you can come back and sit at the kitchen table. It's really not that hard to expand. If you want to expand from singledom, from individuality, all you have to do is count to 2. And you already know how to do that. It doesn't have to be frightening. We can go in there right now. And that's pretty cool. So recently, but getting people to get up from the kitchen table and go into the bedroom or go any other place when it's the only thing they've known, there's usually, they have to go kind of combat a certain degree of fear. So some people have more fear than others. My father, and he's dead now, so I'm not afraid to talk about him. He's a good example because 2 years ago he died. And so since I'm psychic and I deal in these roles, I knew he was dying. And I was actually very excited because as much as I loved him, our relationship, he had a stroke. He was living 3,000 miles away. I was broke. I couldn't go out there. I thought, great, as soon as he leaves his vessel, he leaves his physical body. And I was really excited because I'd see him more often, like I see dead people. And I'd be like, fine, our relationship is finally going to get better. That's what I thought was going to happen. And then he died, and I waited and waited and waited. And he didn't show and he didn't show. So, and then at one point, I did have a dream about him, and there's a lot of dream communication that happens. My dream life is very active. The thing is, here's the thing. I'm really busy. There were two things that happened simultaneously. His transition could not be my priority because I've had a shitload of work to get done. There's only so much as I like to stay in bed, there's only so much time you can spend in dream time. So even though that's interdimensional, I do a lot of work with groups, I go to a lot of space meetings when I'm dreaming. The dreams aren't dreams. Like I go off into the astral realms, then we get a lot of work done. So basically, I received a communication not too long ago that said that he'd been having a hard time getting through. That's one thing that happened because it was so crowded. And also because we're in this weird time of transition where all icons, all saints, etc., are coming down, but they're not down yet. And until we're all up to 5, they're serving a purpose. A lot of them are crashing, but there's still a lot of work. Like in some ways I'm a shuttle, and I know that having been Joan of Arc, who was sainted, there's still a lot, like the Ascension Arc is still running, and you don't dismantle a ship until and that's what the Ascension Arc is. It's a device designed to lift as many people up as possible. You don't dismantle the thing until the job's done. You don't take apart a ship while there are people on it. So a lot of that mechanism, energetically speaking, it's still running. A lot of people still pray to Joan of Arc. A lot of the Archangel, that's still running. Eventually, when everyone's up at 5, there aren't going to be no icons. So if you can get up to 5 and stay there now, more power to you. Please help. We're trying to get as many people up there to hold that space and, build it and generate it and really solidify it. But there are still a lot of people in 3. There's a tremendous amount of work that is still getting done. A lot of darkness is still being transmuted and kicked off the planet. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So it's still running. And I don't know if any of you remember, I think it was my last live stream where I was talking about, I'm clearing for a second. I'm yawning not because I'm tired, I'm yawning because I'm clearing for the populace. That's why I'm rocking too. There's energy that's being moved. In hang on. In probably I don't know what year it was. That's helpful. I had I was dying at the time, and I had a alternative healer. I know I told this story before. I'm going to tell it again very, very briefly. An alternative healer from Australia had checked in on my energy while I was asleep, or at least trying to sleep. They were trying to figure out why I never slept. I never went into REM. I do now, but I didn't then. And I really was dying. My organs were failing. And this wasn't John of God, the heal. It was, I did use John of God, but this was a different person. And this man had said that he had never seen another energy, had another experience that was like mine when he went to work on me. He said, when you went to sleep, there were literally thousands and thousands of people who were petitioning or who wanted something from me. And when I went to sleep, I didn't sleep because I was going so quickly and serving all of them. There was like a tremendous amount of work that was being done. And I still experience a variety of that. It's not the same as it used to be. It used to be just 100% draining. And now it's a little bit different. Some people are taking their power back. In the fourth dimension, there are tremendous amount of transition going on. It's a migration. So some people are going up, some people are going, star seeds are coming in and going to 3 to help lift. It looks a lot like a water wheel. The Ascension Arc in general is kind of a water wheel. There's a lot of rotation of populations going on. The dark is going out. Some darkness is being held in containers to where it kind of coalesces and it's condensed. That's the word I want. Let me turn this off. I hope I don't get disconnected. Oh, there we go. It's being kind of condensed, some darkness, and other darkness is being felt and transmuted by the collective. Then there are other relatively, I almost said useless populations, but not really. That's not the word I want. There's some populations that really aren't doing anything yet. And there are different populations of the populations that are the groups, I should say, of the groups that are not doing very much. There are some that are not active because they're holding space in 0 point. It's very uncomfortable. So it's not like we're not working. I'm in one of those groups who are kind of holding a space of 0 point, and it's very uncomfortable. It doesn't look as though we're particularly active. It's kind of like the way meditation is, where you're not particularly doing anything, but you're doing quite a bit. And then there are other populations that really aren't doing very much. Relatively inactive, but not really doing very much energetically either. And they're in a different section. I watch them a lot. So they really haven't mobilized yet. I'll put it that way. That's a better way to say it. We hope that they will kind of engage soon. Back to my father for a minute. So when he died, I was expecting that I would see him. And so recently I found out that one of the reasons, there were several reasons I didn't see him. One of the reasons was that he couldn't get through. Not so much nepotism. Just because he's my father, there are a whole bunch of other people who are also soul family. And biological relationship doesn't matter as much as maybe you wish it would. But that wasn't the real reason. So this was fascinating because I did eventually connect with him not too long ago, and that's really what I wanted to tell you about. But one of the reasons it took so long for him to reach me, because usually there is, usually when people die, they hang around. It's not like they jump to heaven right away. There's usually a period of transition where they're getting their bearings. They usually, that's nice. Um, they're getting their bearings, and they usually hang out. They kind of lurk around their old environment for a little bit. They hang out around their body for a while. You've heard of people floating above their body. It's because they're just kind of making their transition. It's kind of like for a little while they have one foot on the boat and one foot on the pier. They're out of body, but they're a little nervous. They don't want to leave their physical circumstances just right away. So they hesitate for a while, particularly in my father's case. Also, this is where a lot of times you get hauntings too, depending on the amount of fear or lower energy that a person carries. And boy, is my father a perfect example of this. Depending on how attached they are to their physical circumstances, if you are somebody who really likes your stuff, you might actually, not intending to haunt an object. I mean, really, you don't really get people who say, I think I'm going to linger around my dead body, around my stuff. I think I'm going to haunt my house. You really don't have that so much. What you have is, in my father's case, he had a lot of attachment to physical, the notion of physicality, his stuff. He had a really beautiful house in Los Angeles. He spent his entire life cultivating physical things. He was an artist and a framer of. He was a frame designer for only. He didn't do shabby things. It wasn't like he was a framer. He framed only museum quality things. It was he would design things and send it up to a shop where other people made them. But he framed Picassos and Rembrandts, and like it was that strata, and there was a certain standard of, and it was all about like how do you present antiquities, and like impressing the rich people. That's really that was on one side of the family. The other side of the family was completely different, because my entire job of my incarnation is to bridge the extremes. And my mother's side, was homeless, and we literally ate out of garbage cans and drank out of puddles. And that's where I lived. And why the parental units didn't bridge these two extremes. In my case, I was their only child. I can talking about that a different day. But in my father's case, there was, and he was also a Leo. There was an extreme amount of pride in presentation, the way you're perceived, the way you're viewed. There was an attachment to substance of a certain caliber and an expectation, pride, a lot of volume. And you expect to be on a pedestal. And you had to, there was a lot of pride in lineage. And my grandfather was world famous, and he had a one-man show at the Louvre. And it was like, Stephanie, you must continue this heritage. And the fact that I went into spirituality, which was an embarrassment to my father. Like, this is something you ought to be ashamed of yourself for being so intellectually tacky. And he was so sure of himself that there was nothing outside of the physical experience. What I found out was that he experienced a certain amount of, I'm not saying you have to, so there is no judgment day. Unless you experience judgment because it's a reflection of you. You yourself are extremely judgmental. And when he died, he had, to put it mildly, he had a very difficult transition. He couldn't let go of his stuff. He couldn't be he was so inflexible. His belief system was so inflexible that he couldn't let go of his own perception. And he experienced just releasing the amount of sheer conviction, which I can relate to. He couldn't bend his own conviction on so many points that he experienced a lot of shame, tremendous amount of regret. I know this now because I finally talked to him. And we had I'll call it an encounter. I will say we had an encounter. It was a long encounter. And it was very moving. And I wanted, so I'm, the reason I'm sharing this was because somehow it's pertinent. Like I didn't, this happened probably, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago, maybe not quite that long, but he died 2 years ago. But he finally came through. Remember when I was talking about the life review? So there's a reason that if this is coming through, I hadn't intended to talk about any of this, but if this is coming through, then it's because it's timely. Remember I was talking about the life review because I recently went through a life review. I've gone through them before. A life review is, because there's a living death too at this time of the ascension word, because this is the apocalypse. Do you know this? The apocalypse is sometimes confused with Armageddon. Armageddon is the destruction of the world. But the apocalypse is really, apocalypse means lifting of the veil. So it hasn't completely happened yet. We're getting it in little stages where light and understanding clarity is beginning to come through. But depending on what level of work you've done, what degree of darkness you've cleared, this is either going to come as no surprise or it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. When we die, we go through a life review. Only sometimes you don't have to die. It is possible to have a life review while still being in a physical vessel. I recently had one, which I talked about on a past live stream. And they can either be enlightening, depending on who you are. Like this was I think it was probably my third. And you can go back and listen to my account of my most recent one. But basically, you're in front of peers who have also had theirs. So it's basically a way of helping you clear out and account for, it's basically an accounting of your own behavior. So it's not a judgment, but it's very often experienced as a judgment by people who expect judgment because they are themselves judgmental, and you get yourself reflected back at yourself. You basically see with crystal clarity all of your own behavior, the darkest aspects of yourself, and all the places where you know what it's like? It's like like the interstices of bark, like deep tree bark. It always makes me think of that. You know how like on certain bark of trees where it's like not the smooth kind of bark, but like the places where it's really rough, like there are definitely nooks and crannies, and you might think something's nice and clean, but then where have you been dishonest? Where did you hide something? Where were you hoping somebody couldn't see something? Where did you think you could keep something a secret? Where did you secretly look down on another being and say, better you than me? That person should never wear that out of the house, or Where did you secretly feel superior? All that stuff is not judged. There is no external authority. There's no one you can put, not really. This is why there are icons or gods or archangels, or there's help available within certain strata for a reason, and that's to help us out of darkness. So in the fourth dimension, there are these beings like saints and angels and archangels. Angels exist many places, but there's a reason that we need, for real, we do it. We need them when we're in darkness. It's kind of like going diving, only, you know, like those old time diving suits, or kind of like going into space where you're like away from your ship. If you go on a spacewalk, whatever. It's probably a stupid analogy, but I like the diving analogy better. Like in those old time diving suits where you've got this massive helmet and you're going to get oxygen. It's like you've got a lifeline. You need a lifeline when you go down into density because you're in density. So you need a lifeline. And you want a being who can do both things so that you don't get lost or trapped in darkness. So that's what, like, there's the saints and the angels, and for a time when we've been trapped in density, all of those things really served a purpose. When we're all out, when we're all in the fifth dimension, everyone who wants to go, we're not going to need those anymore. There's a certain degree of autonomy. You exchange the connectivity. It's a different kind of connectivity. It goes from being the single, petitioning the external source, to taking full responsibility of your own self, but also participating in the service toward others. The dynamics are all changing. There's a way that that's happening. The whole mechanical structure of the exchange is all changing. But there's a reason that it has existed in the realm of duality. There is a reason that it has existed the way it has existed. And until everybody's out, a certain portion of it is going to continue to exist. There is going to be a tipping point, however. We're reaching the, and don't ask me to put a time frame on it, I can't. I wish I could. I'm off the timeline, so and plus nobody can really tell. But there is, you know, it's like the 100th monkey principle. There is a point where we're going to reach a tipping point, like the 100th monkey tipping point. It's a certain, I don't know how to say it. It's a tipping point. And the whole wheel is going to flip around, where we're going to have more light than we are darkness. And then it's going to be a very rapid flip. Like, for real, that's happening. And then it's going to be like, okay, they're ready, and the veil comes off. That's the apocalypse, is the lifting of the veil. And right now, it's like right now people are waking up, and it's a process, and we're all transmuting our darkness. You can only feel it in order to heal it. So certain amount of darkness is being transmuted through feeling. So if you're somebody who's constantly not looked at or not felt their feelings. My father was one of these. He was ashamed of crying, would never cry. He was embarrassed if somebody else cried. He would get mad. He would get mad pretty easily. But he would get mad if somebody cried. He thought he was ashamed of it. He was very critical of people who cried because they weren't strong. He was very, very old school. So when he transitioned, he had a very difficult time. He had to still work through, he had to process. Sometimes there's a certain amount of counseling, and I almost want to use the word rehab. There's a lot of counseling. Like, you don't go through the process alone. When you die, when you leave your body, you're not alone. You're usually given someone in the fourth dimension. It will be like a departed or several family members that you recognize from your life that you've just left. They will come to you in a form that you recognize, because think about it, it's a transition from, unless you're ready for something different, but most people, if they're still very attached, it's particularly if they're having a difficult time making the transition, there really is a loving presence who's trying to make it as easy as possible. So they're not going to make you take a giant step if you're not ready for it. You're going to be met with somebody that you feel comfortable with, that you recognize, to make it as easy as possible for you to leave the old platform of solidity. It'll be something familiar to you. So in my father's case, he had a hard time letting go, and particularly he had a hard time letting go of his own judgment and his own belief system. I've said that the belief barrier is the thing that is the hardest to cut through, because people are so convinced, most people, many people, are very convinced that they already know. And in my father's case, he was convinced that he already knew. And he also, it was very funny, because he prided himself on being open-minded. And he didn't like to be laughed at. He was a Leo. So he had a real tough time. And it was a while before he came to see me. And the first night that he showed up in a dream, and I'd actually stopped looking for him. When he first died, I was looking for him like every night. And plus I see dead people. So, and there was a while, a couple of years ago, where I had beings all over my apartment. I had to work to cut through the strata to just get the ones that I wanted. And sometime, maybe tonight, maybe I'll tell you about that. There was a period of time for about 2 or 3 years where this apartment was mobbed. It was like Grand Central Station. You ever watch that show Medium, where she sees a lot of people in her apartment? My whole apartment was just crowded with people. Animals too, tons and tons of animals for a long time. And now it's basically, I don't experience that anymore, but I get the ones that I want. And sometimes if people have business with me, they'll come in. Like there was a Chinese man who was here for about 2 weeks, and he used to be the counsel for, I wasn't going to talk about this at all, but he used to be the spiritual counselor for emperors in China. And he came in to give me guidance. Anyway, he counsels twin flames. He's there to counsel spiritual leaders or assist spiritual leaders with taking leadership roles. Like that's his job. And he showed up in the bathroom one time when I was in a salt bath clearing, and I opened my eyes, and there was a Chinese man in the bathroom. Shocked the hell out of me. That was a couple of years ago. He wasn't looking at me. He was respectful. He was looking off in the distance, but he was like communicating with me telepathically. And then when I got out of the tub, he was bigger than I was too. He's taller and like in a big robe. It was funny. And he just stayed for like 2 weeks. Anyway, and he sent me a lot of messages about stepping into a leadership role with my twin. And that was his whole job, was to counsel twin flames. And then it's like he left. It's like he imparted his knowledge over this length of time. And then he had to go, because he had to go on another couple of people. But he sent me information And I know that specifically it was related to twin flames, and it's like that's his job, is to counsel spiritual leaders who are in the process of stepping into roles where they have to do their job. And it had something to do with energetic transmission, but he's done this before. It's like he's gone through history, and he used to do this for some emperor, and I don't even know, I don't follow that, but I know that that was his role. Because when I first opened my eyes, I was like, what the fuck are you here? Why are you here? I did not expect that. But you do learn to go with the flow, because there are a lot of these realms, they all overlap. It's only a matter of being able to see them. They overlap whether you're aware of them or not. One time when I was in long time ago, I remember my grandmother being in my grandmother's living room, and there were like a group of like 3 or 4 army soldiers. They were soldiers, and looked like they might have been from World War II. And they walked right through her apartment. They walked right through her living room. And it was like they didn't even notice that they were in anybody's house, and they probably didn't. Realms overlap, dimensions interact, and constantly. Just they interact constantly. Not everything is solid. I remember, and my grandmother didn't, she couldn't see them. I could see them. They walked right through the wall. They kept walking right through the room, between her and the television that she kept watching. And then they were gone. They left via the other wall. They walked right through her living room. I remember that. They were in like dressed like they were, maybe had been in World War. I don't know anything about fashion, but, or uniforms, but, it looked like maybe it was World War II era, but I remember that. And then it's, she wasn't aware of it. If you don't see higher dimensions, you don't see it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen all the time. It happens all the time. At any rate, my father had his, so what happens in a life review is that you experience yourself, and it is just an accounting. So in my father's case, so before you can rise, even as a spirit, before you can't go into higher realms. You can't take fear, regret, anger, humiliation, shame, huge one. You can't take any of that into a realm where it doesn't exist. So you have to get rid of it. So all of these negative emotions, all of these processes designed to clear, like the life review, it seems like a very harsh experience, and it absolutely can be, but it's never meant as punishment, and it's meant as an assist, because the universe, even at its darkest, is all loving if you recognize how to view it. Do you want to get down? In order to reach a higher dimension, he had to get rid of the shame. So, and in order to, and also this is a process that's happening collectively and as a culture as well. It's happening globally because the entire planet is ascending. So I'm putting you down for a minute. Do you want to? Here, go up there. Wait for a little bit. So my father had a great deal of density, heaviness to clear, a lot of very, very strong negativity, a lot of attachment to his old belief system. He had to get rid of that before he could move to even 4. So he went through a lot of counseling, and a lot of time passed. And then the first night that he showed up in a dream, he showed up in a dream where it was nighttime. And when he turned around and looked at me, he had egg all over his face. And he showed up and he sent me a message telepathically, and I knew symbolically. He was admitting that he was wrong. Like, okay, you were right. I see that there was actually something here, and he had a lot and has a lot to. He's done a lot of work, but the fourth dimension, where we go right after we die, when we leave our physical form in the third dimension, we go into the fourth dimension, and usually in that space, we retain our identity for a time, our personal identity. We leave our body, but our identity is intact while we process, while we deal with, or make the transition to letting go of that too. So he was processing a lot of emotions. And he was going through his life review, which can be lengthy and difficult. The last time I had it, in this lifetime, I stayed in my physical body. But it really is very much of a reset, where you just get corrected. Like, just remember why you're here. Remember that you're not separate from this person. And this past time that it happened to me, it really wasn't. It still sucks. It always sucks when you have it, because you feel, anytime you made somebody feel embarrassed or less than you, or wherever you need to be corrected, reminded. And here's the thing, it's always going to be something that, like, if you can think of a time, or like, I thought less than that person, if you're consciously aware that you did it to someone and you already regret it, if you have called yourself out on your own bullshit, that's not what's going to come up in your life review. What's going to come up in your life review is sometime where you thought, where you were not aware of it, or you thought you got away with it. So fortunately for me this last time, it really wasn't that bad at all. And sometimes you can also get reminded that you can be shown how you positively impacted someone or a circumstance also. But usually that doesn't really happen until you've left your physical body and you're going through a complete reset. There's something like a living death, and sometimes you just kind of get gutted. Wrong word. Flushed out of all negativity. You get reset while still in the same physical form. If you can hang on for 1 second, I need to turn this heat on because I'm cold. So I was going to talk about self-forgiveness. So I was going to talk about clearing darkness, because darkness is going to be dealt with in one of two ways. The third dimension is a realm of duality, and it's going to go. They're going to be in the third dimension. They're going to be equal amounts of dark and light. In the process of ascension, it's a matter of getting darkness off the planet, because we can't take it someplace where it doesn't exist. Some of it, I know I've said this before, some of the darkness will be able to be transmuted. In order to transmute it, you have to feel it and heal it and bring about the change by changing your own physical experience. You become a stronger light because of the darkness that you've been through, because of the darkness that has passed through you from your own sucky experience, from your own pain. You become a stronger force for light. you become a stronger light. Some of the darkness will refuse to be healed. There's some, and actually some of it still needs to exist in the universe. We don't have the right to tell something that it may not exist, and free choice exists. So the darkness that refuses to be transmuted, if it refuses to move, if it prefers to be condensed, what happens in one direction happens in the other. So if darkness makes us stronger, there is some darkness that is going to become stronger because it met with light. You can't pull on just one side of a rubber band. When the cosmic blast comes in, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that darkness is going to be moved. If it does, it's one of those things like let go or be dragged. If it refuses transmutation, it will be moved to some other place where darkness exists and feeds on, and where darkness wants to be. It's like everything has a purpose. So as a light being, also, and if all is one, whoop, I heard that. You just jumped off the chair. Where are you going, kid? Did you hear that? That was Carmen jumping off the chair. We don't have the right to tell darkness that it may not exist. Plus, we need it so that we can exist if we're talking about the light. And all is one. And there is no judgment and also no preference in 12. But we can choose. All is divine, not all is desired. We can choose where we want to be. So many of us light warriors came to Earth because the darkness had gotten so condensed that light beings have been trapped here and unable to get out. That's why, so I was actually having another diagram for that, but I'm going to use it a different day. I was going to talk about forgiveness. So, coming to terms with self-forgiveness. I had a really hard time with this for a long time in my own experience. I lifted up a whopper. I chose an enormous amount to lift in this lifetime of mine. I wanted another chance to, plus I had to recover from the Joan lifetime. But I just a monumental amount to clear. Part of me wanted to see if I could do it. It also needed to be done. It was the Joan of Arc lifetime had consequences for many, many others. I'm not the only one working on this. I'm just I was the horn of the rhinoceros then. But a lot of people partook of that, and then it spun out and it was very generative, so it spread everywhere. It went in two directions because it has to. And it was also designed to do that. It was designed to separate the wheat from the chaff. So the way you get out of duality is first you separate the energy into dark and light, and then you transmute as much of it from the dark portion. We're aiming for a tipping point. So if it stays 50-50, it's not going to tip. It's going to stay balanced. And so first you want balance. That's the first thing you want. But then if you're trying to lift the vibration of the entire planet, you're going to need it to go more toward the light than the dark. If it's equal, it's going to stay balanced, but it will stay in the third dimension, which is the realm of duality. But if you want it to go up, you're going to have to then First, you balance it from dark and light, and then you're going to have to transmute enough of the darkness that the light has a majority. And by that, you process that darkness through your own experience, become a lighter being, and then have that, I hope, have a lot of people help, and a lot of people are. The darkness, the light is coming in. We're getting new light codes every day. A lot of star seeds are here. They're bringing in the new technologies. Are we there yet? No. We haven't yet hit that whole tipping point. What we're really after is to get to center and tip it. Because once we hit that 100th monkey tipping point, everything flips very, very quickly. It works the same way ice crystals form. You know how water freezes? It's very similar. How it'll just get colder and colder and colder. It has to reach a certain, there'll be like no ice crystals or virtually no ice crystals in water. And then like one or two little crystals will form, and all of a sudden it goes bloop, bloop, and it becomes ice. It happens very quickly. That's what we need on this planet. It's the 100th monkey tipping point, where all of a sudden it reaches a place in collective consciousness and turns very, very quickly. But you have to feel it in order to feel the darkness in order to heal it. So there's a reason. God, I wanted to talk about disclosure too. There's a reason. So on one hand, if you look at the news, which I don't really follow, but if you look at some of these large scale horrors that are coming out, on one hand, you'd say, how could that possibly serve a good purpose? But it serves a good purpose because in order for the planet to ascend, we need the maximum number of people to have to participate fully in the transmutation process. So there are some of us who are light warriors who have been like plugging away at this thing, and we've just been workhorses. You know, you talk to Sarah Adams. I know I've been on this my entire life, and I've had a very difficult life. I've been working through this entire pattern. And it's just like one thing after another. I had somebody tell me about a year ago, well, you just like drama. Your life is so dramatic. You're just one of these people just like drama. It's like bullshit. I don't like drama at all. Not at all. I want a peaceful life as much as anyone. But there are some of us who are willing to go in the mud and go to bat on behalf of a larger cause. Do I like it? No. But some of us incarnated for this reason as light warriors. Because I do value freedom as much as I value my own comfort. It's all one. If somebody else is suffering and I feel that, we have to clean up the whole thing. There are some people who have been working on this and working on this and working on this. We need more people to work on this, but it's a matter of how do you engage, how do you get people engaged when it's not, you're not really taking their choice away from them. It's work that needs to be done. They're here too. I'm talking about like mostly the sleepers who don't really know that anything's going on, or they're good people. They don't know what they could do. The Ascension Arc is designed to lift all of the populations one way or another. I was going to talk about magic too and the way that works. Some of these mass disclosure events, like pedophilia or like human trafficking, or human trafficking in CPS, and you name it. when certain things come to light and the entire population or most of them are very opinionated, it generates a large emotional response. Certain amount of anguish comes up that then has to be processed by each individual. That's a form of transmutation that happens on a collective level. That is, in essence, forcing the population to participate in their own upliftment because they're not yet ready to take individualized action. When they're strong enough, when there's enough light, also enough freedom, when it gets bad enough also, that's another thing. When things get bad enough, each individual is, as they become strong enough, they're inspired to depart from the social organization, the social construct, that's the way I want to say it. They become inspired and strong enough to depart from the social construct that was part of the prison system. And as they leave, they take their own power with them. This is one of the ways that we dismantle the Ascension Arc. There's going to be a point, basically the tipping point, where enough people have made it a vessel of light for the earth. And just like the 100th monkey tipping point, there's now a majority of people who have done the work to leave the previous social construct, taking their power, becoming individual sovereign beings, but also joining in. It doesn't mean you remain as an individual. There's a portion where you leave the old system that is kind of an incestuous clog. It's become so tight in the old system and nothing is working. It's so toxic. It's so bad. But each individual needs to process their own personal amount of horror and be willing to leave it, to actually go to the higher system. And you go by becoming sovereign and individual and kind of free floating. You then find your new tribe, which really feels like home, your soul family. And from there, you network, you connect with everyone else. There is a new distribution system. Oh, now it's too hot. Just a second. So I keep threatening to talk about self-forgiveness. So I had a really hard time for a while with self-forgiveness. I couldn't forgive myself, believe it or not. It was just a point that I was really stuck on in my own personal history. I couldn't forgive myself for having lied as Joan of Arc. I thought it was a tremendous moral failing. This was a couple of years ago, but I really had a hard time with it. The whole Joan of Arc story, it goes as far into victimization, really, as it's possible to go. It's right up there with a Christ story. Or injustice. Basically, it's an injustice, an imbalance, huge imbalance, where one person gives everything and gets nothing, gets killed for it, and one person gets put on a throne and wins through betrayal. It's a huge imbalance. But I went into self-hatred. Oh my God. So my father went into self-hatred too when he died. So this is one of the reasons why he had such a very difficult time. When he went to make his transition, he kind of got stuck. Stuck might be the wrong word. It's not that he actually stopped working through it. It is possible to get stuck for a really long period of time. Like some ghosts do this, where they don't really realize they've died. And there are some hauntings that occur in that region where people don't realize they've died, and they keep seeing they remain in their previous home. And they have a very difficult time seeing anything outside their previous belief system. Their vision is, they basically will see things the way they left it. They won't witness any changes, and they will continue to coexist in the fourth dimension and continue to live in their house while the inhabitants in the third dimension change, etc. I'll talk about that a different day. I keep trying to finish this point about self-forgiveness. If you are someone who has some aspect of your existence, whether it's from a previous life or this life, where you went into extreme darkness, like or maybe some degree of density where you weren't awake for a really long time, or you went into some depth of darkness or despair or depression, or you did something like that could be considered really, really dark or really evil, really bad, really dark. But you are able to go from that degree of darkness. If you're able to flip that fucker, if you're able to go take that degree of darkness and flip it, turn it toward the light, you are really to be congratulated, because that's no small task. So if you're doing that, you need to forgive yourself and not judge yourself for the degree of density that you had, because all that means is that you are someone who has picked up a shitload of darkness off of this planet, transmuted it, and now you're a beacon of light. Many, actually. Many, if not most, of the saints are these people, this population of people. I actually wish I should have done my research before this live stream. Like some of the biggest sinners, or some of the saints had started out some of the biggest sinners, because you go from the darkest of the dark, and through your own experience, if you can manage to lift it and manage to transmute it and change yourself into this radiant being who then is gifting light to the planet. That's a tremendous service, and you need to forgive yourself for whatever the hell it was that you did. Reminds me of A Christmas Carol, Scrooge. If you manage to turn it around, then you've successfully transmuted a huge load of darkness. Let me see, what else is in here? Oops. Hang on a second. Hi, Ling. One second. I've got to get this thing more organized. So do you know in the, sorry, total change of subject. The architecture of the fifth dimension is being built. Everything is entirely different. Everything is based on equal exchange. I wasn't planning on talking about this tonight at all. The reason we go through the 11 gateway is because I know I've said this before, you first learn to balance your masculine and feminine energies within yourself. It has to be equal, giving and receiving. You need to learn to receive. The entire structure of everything is different in 5. You can't take the rules of the 3rd dimension and apply. You can't take it. You can't do it. The 3rd dimension is based in inequality. It's based in competition. Darkness exists. It doesn't exist in 5. In 5, the entire principle, it's all light and love all the time. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of variety. Huge amount of variety. Huge amount of creativity. Everything is self-generative, but everything is also cooperative. So you need to learn how to give and receive equally, and that's because your gifts are required. But in order to in order to keep flow going, you're going to get the same amount of flow that you give. That's one of the reasons that everybody up there is service to others oriented. It's just we give all the time. We look for opportunities to give. It's so interesting when starseeds, or when those of us who will operate this way naturally, when we come down to earth, we very often become, it's such a difficult system to land into. A lot of us don't even come into our bodies, or we get horribly exploited. A lot of us are called enablers, but it's just our basic nature. We have to be trained into learning about boundaries, because in the 5th dimension, everything is shared. In higher dimensions, we just naturally share. We share thoughts, and everything is, oh, my head's bothering me. Downloads, light is data. Light and love, it's all data. In the realm of linearity, the 3rd dimension, linear time, where everything is linear and singular, things like information is delivered via sentences and books. It's one thing at a time, one word at a time, one letter at a time, makes a word, makes a sentence, and you read chapter by chapter, and it makes a book. It's much slower, frustratingly slow, if you come from a higher realm, a higher dimension, where we don't do that. We communicate telepathically. Very often we use many methods of communication at a time. Oh, I was going to talk about that too. In the 5th dimension, if I want to send you something, if I've read a book and I want to communicate what's in that book to you, I can send you the whole book. And you'll just know it. I could pass you a movie with my mind, along with my opinions of it, the thing I was going to tell you. Like, I have this idea about this movie, but I know you didn't see it, but I want to pass you all of this information, and I can just send it to you in like a big comprehensive ball. And if your mind is open, it will just land in your mind. And then you can send me back your opinion. It's all very, very fast. Things just speed up. So your mind needs to be open and able to receive such a thing. That amount of energy, it's not just that your mind has to be open. This is one of the reasons why in the 3rd dimension, where we've been functioning from just, in the past, we've been functioning from just 2 strands of biological DNA, and the other strands of light DNA weren't even activated. It was incredibly difficult to get new information to come through. You couldn't get past the density. You couldn't get past the belief barrier. But all of these things are beginning to come online. Everything in the third dimension became shortened, became truncated. Everything was condensed into two strands of physical carbon-based bodies. Lifespans became shorter, and everything became individuated. So then what you lose when that happens is you lose the ability to see the connectivity between all things. You don't even remember. Imagine, you see how the energy has picked up? So now I'm moving. I'm hot too, because the energy is moving. Many people on Earth don't even remember their childhoods. But if you think about it, there are cycles within cycles within cycles. So the way we have, within a given lifespan, we have many different days separated by a night. Lifespans are no different. Lives are no different. You still remember that you had a childhood. You looked very different. When you're out of body, you can see you can have the whole experience of, you can witness from above your entire life and have a comprehensive experience. And like in the life review, you have a comprehensive experience of all the places where either you went off your own path, every time we come in, we have a given path that we want to take. We plan, it's kind of like planning it's like planning a day. At this time, I'm going to do this. At this time, I'm going to do this. Then sometimes it goes according to plan, sometimes it doesn't. There are entire lifetimes that kind of go awry, where you forgot to listen to God, you lost your GPS, you forgot that you were even supposed to be listening to spirit, or maybe that was your thing you were supposed to conquer. Sometimes people go deep into density in order that it be that much more of a triumph when they finally remember. Some people remember all along. But when you go far up enough, you can see that every single lifetime, it's like you incarnate, then you go back up, and you incarnate, and you go back up. But it's not just endlessly on this planet. There are, especially at this time in history, the call went out because the Earth wasn't going to make it to the fifth dimension. And so the call went out, and there are so many people on the planet before who really are not very experienced at being here at all. And even more starseeds who are waiting to come in, who are just waiting for space. So there are a lot of people, there are a lot of souls who are going to be vacating. When the cosmic blast comes in, it's basically, the cosmic blast is the tipping point that I've been talking about. The tipping point of light. And that's basically, right now we're in the prelude to the apocalypse. Apocalypse, as I said before, apocalypse just means lifting of the veil. When it's like suddenly the veil comes off and all is revealed, there's going to be on one hand, there's going to be like a collective oh shit moment. It's going to feel really great to a lot of us. Like, oh, thank God. Thank God it's going to feel just like home. And then there are a lot of people, like my father was before he died. There's going to be a sudden revelation. What the fuck is happening with me? It drives me crazy. My head always drives me crazy in these things. But it's like you suddenly have a realization, just like in the life review, you suddenly get hit with what can feel like a wave of despair, a wave of remorse, a wave of, it's a very deep, oh shit moment. You suddenly realize where you went off. Like, oh crap, was I going in the wrong direction? I forgot. I went really hard, like my father had this when he died. He had this sudden realization that, like, oh my God, I spent my entire life doing nothing but being judgmental, getting more and more attached to my stuff, getting really mad at people because they didn't agree with me, forcing other people to agree with me. Patting myself on the back for all the wrong things, excluding a whole bunch of people. And there was a tremendous amount of regret, remorse, shame, embarrassment. And I know this because he finally showed up about 2 years after he died. And he could not stop saying he was sorry, which I appreciated. I did. It was just one gigantic, and I really felt, because you really do share, I really felt the depth of his grief, for real. I mean, it was really deep and permeating and real. This was no shallow apology. This was really something where the depth of his remorse and shame, he was ashamed of himself because he recognized, as you do in these life reviews when you go through them, you recognize not only what you did, but you recognize the effect that it had on the other person. You see the legacy that it left, whether it was a good legacy or whether it was a damage that now has to be undone, somebody still has to recover from. And my father was not intentionally cruel. He just had a belief system where he believed he was right. He was so self-righteous, but convinced that he wasn't. He thought that everyone else was wrong. And he thought that in the same way, because people who have been schooled in the school of competition, a competitive mindset where you have to, if you're the biggest and the best, you win. That's an abuse of power unless you use your stature or if you use your wealth or your power or your strength. If you're stronger, you need to be protecting the weaker. You don't misuse your power by inflicting your will upon the other. You're not winning if you do that. It is entirely possible to win every single battle if you perceive it that way, to win every single battle. And as a result, you lose the entire war because the war was actually for balance. So if you take all of the power and then you wield it to shove the other one down to absolutely nothing, you've lost. That wasn't a win at all. A good leader creates other leaders. It will create equality. So that's the lesson of the 11 gateway. The 11th commandment is put the mountain in the valley. And what that's taking you to is 0 point. You take the stronger, whoever is stronger gives it to the weaker one. And you create equality. The space is also a gift. And the wheel is also flipping. You can count on that. I feel like I skipped over a point. What was it? So group dynamics and karma. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Yeah, when you go through these life reviews, hi Andrew. When you go through these life reviews, you really feel whatever you made the other person feel, and then you see the effect that it had. Because you may have interacted with just one individual, but you're also responsible. Like, for example, if that person had a strong life purpose where they were supposed to be doing something, maybe they were a lighthouse for others, and you did something where you knocked somebody back, you misused your power, and instead of working with someone or affording them the opportunity, you prevented them from going on their life mission. You're responsible for the fact that all of these other people didn't have the they weren't taught by this person, or they weren't basically you screwed up, and you're responsible for the effect or lack thereof. Whatever there's a certain amount of flexibility, a great deal of flexibility actually in the quantum field for rerouting. It's like GPS. But sometimes, depending on what the interaction is, some of these imbalances or some errors are so egregious, and sometimes they really do affect groups. There are certain events that really do change the course of history for an entire swath of people, like JFK's assassination or something like that. There really is a spiritual war on this planet. The dark will distinctly go after in the third dimension, in the fourth dimension too. The dark has agendas, and in the third dimension, they really do go after key individuals or places in history where they know that if they can impact this one thing, it will have a huge ramification. That definitely happens. It doesn't happen as much as you go up. And in the fifth dimension, we just need to get all our people up there. Oh, so I was going to talk about the way the Ascension Arc works. I had to do another diagram because I lost I don't know where the other one went. I'm not going to go into all of the mechanics about it tonight, but going into magic for just a little bit, the way the Ascension Arc works is, this is a very, very primitive diagram. It's actually a Merkaba, very long-standing Merkaba over history. And it's a structure that's designed to pull in as much of the energy from the sleeping populations of people, or the populations who were basically trapped in three, while still allowing for personal choice, because you have to allow personal choice, still affording for personal preference, but while giving as much assistance and accelerated growth as possible. So it's a structure that pulls all of the energy from each individual into basically a containment unit. And then there's kind of there's a rotation, and it's a little bit of a sorting process, and it amplifies, it increases the experience of empathy. It accelerates the experience of empathy, and then it allows each individual to get as much experience as possible in the shortest time frame, because we're running out of time. And then according to each soul's preference, they will go into a particular holding pen. it's not, that sounds worse than it is. They can change. But remember when I said, I was talking in one of my other live streams, I was talking about I was talking about my friend's hysterectomy, where she had I'll get that in a second, where she had incarnated into a lineage with very, very corrupted feminine lineage, corrupted femininity. And in order to get the old corrupt pattern out, her sometimes one organ will kind of take a hit for the team. We're all working in one way or another. There are different ways of clearing darkness, and the way her soul chose to clear darkness is for her body to have. She got a uterine growth, and it gathered a whole. It's basically a solidification of corrupted feminine coding, and her body took on a whole bunch of dark feminine energy from her lineage, but also from the area around her, like all the people she associates with, etc. So that when that growth was removed, along with all of her feminine organs, it basically tossed that all out, so that we don't have to deal with that anymore. I realized after I did that live stream that there's another way that works. Like, that's the way it works within one physical body. But it can also happen that an entire person can say, well, and so a lot of people are going to be doing this, and that's why I'm saying it. Because on the subject of death and dying, a lot of people are going to be doing this too, where, I've said that very often for a lot of people who are like my father, who have very strong belief systems that are very rigid and just hugely resistant to changing, where they think they know it, they already know the way it is, and they're not going to change it. Very often for people like that, the path of least resistance, and energy always takes the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance for a lot of people is death. It's just that much easier. So my father was one of these people. Getting him to change his mind, getting him to move his stuff or change his daily habits even. Really tough. So for him, it was a much easier and more effective and more useful, faster way for him to do it. He was closer to the tipping point, put it that way. He was much closer to the tipping point to just die. And in order to, the fastest way for him to do that, rather than linger and try to work his way up to light, it was much easier to dive down into the darkness. So when he went dark, I'll put it this way, his biggest service was actually to be removed. It's a better way for him to clear darkness off the planet. It's a little bit of a martyr move. Like right now we're at this shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. The age of Pisces is the age of the martyr. So self-sacrifice is really, self-sacrifice, the age of the martyr. You sacrifice yourself for a cause. So my father was still very much in that pattern, and I'm not judging at all, because God knows I did it. I did it as Joan of Arc. Can't get much darker than that. So a lot of people, I spoke to somebody the other day, and I don't remember if I've said this part in a live stream or not. I wrote it to somebody. So if I'm repeating myself, forgive me. Maybe there are new listeners. I spoke to somebody not too long ago whose father-in-law lived with them. And he did this exact same thing. He went from being a very pleasant member of the family. He did basically what my friend's uterus did. Once it was decided that it was leaving, like there was a while that that my friend had this growth, but it was remaining at a stable size, and it was a little bit like on the fence. Like, are we just taking the growth out, or is it going to grow? Or is it benign, or is it really malignant? What's happening with it? There's like this undecided on the fence period of time. Once it was determined that yes, it's going to be taken out, this thing went from being this size to being enormous. And that's because it's like all aboard, everyone on this train, all matching frequencies, all corrupt feminine lineage that is ready to leave the planet. This thing's leaving. So there are people that are doing that too. So once it's decided, okay, the path of least resistance for me, it's easier for me to change by leaving my body and taking the entire body out. A lot of negativity, a lot of ailments will suddenly jump aboard. Very often a family member will take on as much of the negativity or as much of the old corrupt patterns from their family lineage as possible. So they can go from being a very pleasant person to a very negative, very symptomatic of all the past family crap. A very pleasant person to an extremely angry, hostile, depressed, dark, sick, every family ailment, accusational, crazy, every symptomatic thing, extremely condensed version of all the every shitty portion of their lineage will just be condensed in this person. So a lot of that is going to be happening, particularly as we come down to the wire. Here's the thing. So you can't, as I said this before, I know I repeat it all the time. Every force evolves a form, and you can't pull on just one end of a rubber band. So as the light on the planet gets lighter, the dark is getting darker. Where's it going? Some of it is being transmuted into light. And as the light is getting lighter and we reach the tipping point, the dark is the same degree of darkness, but it's being condensed into one of these. It's not a perfect diagram. Pretend one of these is really dark. There's a section of the Ascension Arc that's getting darker and darker and darker. And it's the same as this woman's family member. This woman that I spoke to had a family member. Her father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer and went from being totally pleasant, a loving family member, and all of a sudden, very rapid amount of time, did this total turnaround where all of a sudden he's this hideous monster with every symptom. She said it's like he collected all of the negativity from the rest of the family in the round. Like all sides, all the negativity suddenly went to him. And then when he dies, he's taken it all with him. That's happening. That's also a version, if you can expand that idea, that's also happening with the planet. It's also happening with institutions. The things that are dying are dying. When they're dying, they're taking all of that negativity down. The new system is the new refreshed system. There's one, it can also happen in a larger group. There are, so I've been watching, I don't know how to explain this. I know what it is. I don't know how to explain it. You know, we're living in a fractal universe too. Fractal dimension. I'm very aware of this. I see this all the time. There are particular patterns that are playing out in energy streams. They're like, I watch energy streams, and there are energy streams that will have like a particular localized pattern, which will play out here and here and here and here and here. It looks just, it's basically a fractal. And whatever happens in the larger fractal happens simultaneously in real time in all of these smaller versions. It's a hologram. So what I've been watching, so if we trace it up back from the idea that my friend had a hysterectomy and she took, her uterus took a hit. And we took out all of the localized corrupt feminine codes. And when that leaves, the new light codes come in. So it's the beginning of the circulation process that I was talking about. You have to give something, or you have to something has to leave in order for something else to come in. So when we're in the fifth dimension, it's interesting because more like we're in general, we're expanding too. So it's not like it's always a sacrifice. It's experienced as a sacrifice in the third dimension in carbon-based form because we're dealing with material. But on the whole, we're also expanding, and we're stepping into our light, more light strands of our DNA are coming in. They're coming online. So it's not just a sacrifice, even though on one hand we have to get rid of the density. But when the light is all running, it doesn't feel anything like a sacrifice. It really just feels like a refreshment, like a regeneration. It's a regeneration is really what it is. A flow of light, and it's much more like liquid. Like when you transfer something, new knowledge and new love comes in, but you don't actually lose anything. You're merely transferring it, you're gifting it to someone else. That's the way it's really meant to work in the fifth dimension. In the third dimension, everything is reduced so that you have to lose something tangible in the age of martyrdom where everything is compressed. You're losing something tangible in order to get something light. But there really is we're in the process of our light codes coming online. So there's a lot more expansion, a lot more love and light. For real. For real. And our bodies are going to wind up regenerating much better too. But there's a version. So what happened with my friend's hysterectomy, where the one organ took a hit for the one body, or a portion of her body took a hit for the single body. Or in this other person's circumstance where one member of the family took a hit for the localized group. If you continue that pattern out, there are certain fractals, like I'm watching this in my own life where I'm aware of certain fractals that I can identify very clearly, probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 5 different fractals that I'm personally connected to. And I'm waiting to see, I know one of them, it's terrible, kind of a terrible position to be in. It's a matter of changing probabilities. I'm watching these probabilities fluctuate. Because prediction, one of these groups is going to take a hit. I'm not saying the entire group is going to fall, but it's primarily going to be, I think it's one of the female figures. I really do. It's possible that it's not. I'm not sure which group is going to take the hit, though. I'm watching it, and I'm watching the probabilities fluctuate. It's kind of like watching a tipping point. like it's a matter of who's transmuting, because all of these different individuals have free choice, but they're all in the same pattern. And I'm not entirely sure because I only deal with watching groups. I don't have enough data about the individuals to see who's processing who's processing their shit faster, who's transmuting their own darkness, or who's the stuckest. I can kind of take some guesses. There are some, whoever stops the circulation and goes backwards, and if you can watch people, if they go down into clutching mode, if they go into fear, if they slip into old patterns of individuation, but not the kind that offers freedom, the kind that is rooted in fear. If it's rooted in stepping forward into expansion, if you're stepping outside the group in order to kind of establish yourself as an independent presence, if you're stepping off into trust, then that's one thing. If you're going, and I'm not knocking, there's certain kind of retreat that goes toward spiritual exploration. You really do have to turn inward sometimes and go into a period of isolation, like hermit mode, in order to, like that really is kind of a requirement. You need a certain amount of introspection for personal development. In this process, that's one of the stages, so I'm not knocking that. But if you're using isolation and it's not turned toward purging, developing, if you're going down and it's purposeless, or if you're going backwards or holding on too much into tradition, if you're becoming more rigid, and it's not being transmuted, you can run into trouble. So it's interesting because I'm watching the same pattern in about 5 different places, and I know that one of them, and they're all in the same like triangle. So I know that within these groups are small fractals, these patterns that are replaying over and over and over and over. And I know, just like my friend's uterus took a hit for the individual, and this person's father took a hit for the localized family. I know that within this group, one of these fractals is gonna not go. It's gonna take a hit. And the one it is determines on how much is the interaction, is this pattern being used toward progress, or is it going backwards? If it's going backwards, it's not going to make it. Whatever the darkest one is going to take the darkness and feed the darkness. It's going to be pulled backwards instead of going forward. So my point is, it's up to you where you go. Everyone really needs to be doing their own work at this time, serving a purpose. So as we go forward, earning a living, for example, earning a living is going to be replaced by serving a purpose. Everyone's going to be serving a purpose and serving a purpose. Earning a living is based in fear for survival of the individual. It's on the low strata. Serving is service-based. Purpose is purpose-based. It's also love-based. Where was I going on this? In the 5th dimension, it's self-generating, and the more you serve, the more you get. Serve is possibly the wrong word. The more you give, the more love comes in, and it generates more and more and more. It's constantly expansive. What is on you? Sorry, sweetie. Luke came to say hello. Basically, everybody wants to give because it feels very good to give. And everyone is empathic. So when you please someone else, you feel their pleasure. And it's just like, it's almost like one gigantic orgy. It's like one, it just flows and flows and flows. It's extremely creative space. The more you give, the more you receive in the fifth dimension, because it's not a system based in lack. It's based in flow. So the more you flow, the more it flows. Everything is amplified. And it's also self-leveling. It's basically, it's like the ocean. And then the higher you go, where the drop is like the individual, right? Like in the third dimension, is the experience of separation. That would be the drop. But then you join a tributary, you join a river, and then the ocean refuses no river. So everything goes into the ocean. The beautiful thing about a realm like the 12th dimension, which is the ocean, is that you have the comprehensive experience of fully comprehending all the other viewpoints, dark and light. There is no longer any judgment of any kind. Everything serves everything else. And there's movement, there's constant movement in the ocean, but there's also constant self-leveling. So there's no lack whatsoever. Every time there's an indentation, something comes in to fill it immediately. There's simply no lack. It's a wonderful place to be. I suggest we all go. So the way magic works, the way the Ascension Arc was designed to work, is that we've got all these groups with all these people in it, and they're in holding, they're basically like, it is incredibly simplistic because it's really a lot more complicated than this. But if all of these are holding pens, the basic idea draws on the principle of magic, whereas you condense energy of a particular kind. You condense it and concentrate it and concentrate it and concentrate it. And then the same way, when you're doing something with magic, practical magic, you can take an energy and concentrate it into an object. The object itself doesn't have the power. It's the energy that you connect it to. If you know what you're doing and you connect, you draw on a certain amount of energy and you apply it to this object that represents a certain certain recipe or a certain certain bit of energy. There are some substances that contain energy or record it easier than others. Wax, for example, is incredibly absorbent. It holds a pattern. So you can imbue. The reason candles are used so often is because it combines the properties of wax, which will hold an intention. If you can take a wax candle and you focus your mind and you do something on it that combines action, physical action taking, and you inscribe something on a candle intensely, you intensely focus with your emotion. This doesn't have to be malevolent. Not at all. It's frequently misinterpreted by people who don't understand what the hell other people are doing. But you can concentrate with intention and apply an emotion to wax while taking a physical action, like writing your name or writing a prayer or something on a wax candle. And the wax will pick up that intention of yours. And then when you take another very intense energy and you light the candle, fire is very intense and very hot. So if you then set that on an altar that you've applied your intention to, it's a sacred space. You say, I'm dedicating it to this benevolent purpose. I will not practice black magic ever, but I'm a huge fan of magic. Energetic wizardry. No spiritual warrior should shy away from working with energy in an intense way. They use it because it works. The reason the church didn't want us when it was just a control system, the reason we were steered away or witches were burned is because they didn't want us to have this power. And you can take substances like you can dress a candle with additional energies like, like certain leaves from certain plants. There's a reason we burn sage, for example, because it works for certain reasons. If you dress a candle and you're applying your intention and your emotion to the wax, which will then hold it there, and then you set it on a blessed surface, an altar that you've dedicated toward your purpose, and then you apply fire, which intensifies it, and it also sends it up. It sends that intensity up into the quantum field with your intention. Benevolent, I hope. That does something. For real, you're changing the energetic field with your own intention. So we're taking principles like this and we're using it in the Ascension Arc. So you can create, we've made this energetic construct that utilizes people's free will to put them in the appropriate holding container that they chose by virtue of their own energetic signature, because you have to respect free choice. This is all, by the way, this is all overseen by the 12th dimension, where there is no agenda. The agenda is balance for the entire planet so that we could get everyone who wanted to go through the 11 gateway. It was basically the way you get the planet to freedom. And when I say freedom, that doesn't mean that you liberate the beings that don't want to be liberated, because some truly are dark. And the dark ones should go where the dark ones want to go. You don't have that right to make the decision for someone else, except for the time when the planet was truly trapped and in darkness. The reason so many of us came down, I know I'm on like 3 or 4 different subjects here. The reason so many light warriors from all over the galaxy came to help Earth was because it had gotten unbalanced to the point where the light beings that wanted to get out couldn't. There was too much density and they were unable to free themselves. So we went down with the Ascension Arc to separate the light from the dark beings and then see how much darkness could be transmuted. But in order to do that, we need a lot of volunteers willing to come down and experience a certain amount of the anguish, because in order to heal, it needs to be felt and transformed. You can't merely snap your fingers or use any other clearing method and decide that the darkness simply vanishes or boom, you're light. That doesn't happen. The darkness can be transmuted to light or not. You have to give darkness the choice. Will you be transmuted or not? And if some of the darkness will be transmuted, it has to be felt and healed. You have to heal. You have to feel it in order to heal it. So the feeling is all of these feelings of grief and anguish and embarrassment and shame and horror. You name it. All of that stuff needs to be felt and then healed, and hopefully not done again. The patterns need to be repaired. And that which refuses to change, it's on its way out. So out of each one of these And there are more. There are many more triangles. This is just a very simple diagram. Whatever is darkest and refusing to budge, this basically the slowest. There's a time window. There is. It's gonna go for sure. So the way magic works, the reason I brought it up was because each one of, remember I said each one of these triads is basically governed by two. There's an 11 gateway there's a gateway at the point of every one of these things, and there are two people on it, two beings on it, and it's at a 3-to-1 ratio. So the proper, I was going to talk about the power of 3 too, but first let me finish this. The way the Ascension Arc works is that for those in the third dimension, we put beings in place that would assist and accelerate the development, accelerate the help given, the assistance given to all beings in whatever. It's a little bit like a little bit like a classroom. Like if you gravitate toward any given classroom, you're going to get a teacher who's going to help you as much as possible for the duration of time that you've got. Oh, Calico. Decline. I'll call her in a minute. Remember, I've gone back to that Joseph Campbell quote, take one step toward the gods, they take 10 toward you. That's true for the third dimension for a given period of time. And it works, I know I've said this before, but it works like a moving sidewalk at the airport that only moves, it will move you very fast, but it's only going to move you if you take a step. So if you step in one direction, it's going to take you 10 more steps, which makes an 11. It works just like that. We were trying to accelerate the development and offer as much assistance as possible for to get as much of humanity through the 11 gateways possible. So that's for a limited duration of time. It's until the tipping point. So everyone should be working as hard as they possibly can on their own crap. Clear as much darkness as you possibly can. But the way it works is that there are two beings on each point, and it's at about a 3-to-1 ratio of imbalance. So what you're trying to do, the appropriate use of power, is that if you've got the advantage, what you should be doing is working toward balance. So if you've got 3 and your partner on that point has 1, you should take one of yours and you offer the assistance. An inappropriate and abuse of power is to say, ha, I'm stronger than you and I'm going to take from you. No, that's completely fucked up. So the way we designed the Ascension Arc is that you have spiritually mature adults, spiritually mature beings who have gone through the awakening, who know what the fuck's going on, and we are basically at the helm of each of these points. And since we know we're supposed to be aiming toward balance and away from imbalance, this is the way it relates to magic. The way you can take an energy, condense it, and place it into a physical object. You can also take an energetic field or an energetic the energy of a specific population. That's the way I wanted to say it. You can take and condense the energy of a specific population and give it to a certain being, like a saint who's the patron saint of such and such. You can give it to a certain icon or a certain pair, and you can place them in charge of a certain population. And if they know what they're doing, so here's the way it works. They will have an interaction between them, but they will also say, okay, this is a planet who doesn't know how to be peaceful. This planet does nothing but war. So from the position of the 12th dimension, if we're all spiritual adepts, we can have, I can take the energy of my population, and on behalf of them, I will have a peaceful interaction with someone from the opposite side. And I will say, hey, you want to cooperate? And the other person, being spiritually mature also, will say, my population hates your population, but you and I can come to an understanding because we're the spiritual adults. And we can even things out between us. So from the position, don't need to do that, from the position of one person having all the pieces and one person having absolutely nothing, if we then even things out between us, we have brought peace to our populations on behalf of them. That way it spares them a lot of the legwork. It's basically the easiest way to get the result that they actually voted for. They went into a jurisdiction of their own accord by virtue of their own energetic signatures. It's basically a way of, it's the way you wanted democracy to work. It is not exactly working right now because we're in a period of transition. Democracy, in the American system, should work, but it's too corrupted. So for example, right now, if we put any further energy into the system the way it is, we're going to be still feeding both sides. We're still going to be feeding the corruption. What we need right now is more people. Basically, it's a way of taking control of the population, the world's populations, but not removing free choice. It's a way of getting just the darkness that will not yield, will not transform, keeps going backwards, keeps going, just feeds the corruption. It's a way of separating the wheat from the chaff, getting all of the corruption condensed. And then if you extend this, what's going to happen is that we're going to wind up with one of these. It's going to be the darkness. It's going to be the heart of darkness. And when the same way, you get it, the same way one of these fractals, the darkest one, will leave the group. And it's going to be condensed into what is basically the darkest piece, whichever piece that is. It will be the black one, the dark one. Then that dark one is going to be truncated, and it's going to be sent to probably Orion or some other place where they want it. So everyone is going to go where they actually want to be. Yeah. Yes. What can I do for you? Now you're on the other side because I didn't give you enough attention on the one side, so you walked around the table and you came over here. Let's see. What time is it? All right, it's 8:30. I've been on for 2 hours and 18 minutes. Yeah. All right. I was going to say a lot more. I feel like I'll end it here, though. How are you doing? Any questions right now? Oh my God, we're about to go through this 1111 gateway. Holy crap. So this 1111 gateway, November 11th, huge manifesting day. Huge manifesting day. And so do your intentional manifesting toward what you want on that day, 1111. Oh, I was going to talk about twin flames too. I've got stuff to say. The day after 11/11, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the day after, is a full moon. So it's going to be a really good time to do your full moon rituals. Manifest the new and drop the old. Full moon rituals, that's a time for shedding of the dropping the old. So one thing that I do on every full moon, I write a list of all the things that I'm releasing. I don't want any of this. Saying goodbye to, you can say it for yourself, you can say it for the collective too. I do both things. Write a list of all the things that you want to get rid of, and then under the full moon or sometime on that day, it doesn't actually have to be nighttime, go outside and you light it on fire and you say something to the effect of, I call in all of the benevolence of the universe to assist me with the following intent. This list represents all of the things that I'm getting rid of, I'm choosing to release from my life. And when you release something, it doesn't mean that you're never going to see it again. Sometimes you can use this ritual to release your expectations. You can release, as smoke rises, you can think of it as taking all of these things, releasing it to the quantum field, where it will come to you it will take the path of least resistance to get to you. So sometimes you can say, bring me all of these things. These are all the things that I release my adherence to. Whoops. I release any linear attachment I may have to these things coming to me in a certain way through one form. I'm willing to just release it so that it could come to me the easiest way, the path of least resistance, this or something better. And I release all these things from my life, and you set it on fire, and that's that. It goes up in smoke, and with it, your cares and worries, I hope. All right, my daughter is trying to reach me, so I'm going to call her back right now. I feel like I forgot to say a ton of stuff. All right. Okay, I love you. If any of you can send me a donation, that would be fantastic. Really, it would be fantastic. I'm going to put the link on my, it's Stephanie Arc Hogarth. If you're watching this on YouTube, my name is Stephanie Arc Hogarth, and you can find me on Facebook. And on Facebook, I'm going to put the link so that if you want to make a donation or book a private session, you can send me a private message, and I would love to do private sessions. Oh God, I was going to talk about communicating with fairies. Okay, next time. I had the most fantastic session with somebody recently, and I was going to talk about that. Okay, I'll do that the next time. I love you all. See you later.